Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so originally I was going to cover X-Men Volume 2, or I guess X-Men issue number 2 rather, but then I forgot the Blackest Night was coming out, the Tales from the Dark Multiverse story, so we've got to cover that. So again, picking up with this, what this does is essentially give us a recap of the events of Blackest Night. Now, we have covered that, so if you want the full totality of what happened in Green Lantern Blackest Night, check the playlist that I have down in the description. It runs from the beginning of Green Lantern Rebirth, explains all kinds of stuff, running all the way up until we get to Blackest Night and Brightest Day. And I think we started War of the Green Lanterns, and then we need to finish that. But this story is amazing. So the way this worked out, and this really centers around the character of Dove. And I want to talk about this for a second, right? Because for Dawn Granger, she was an interesting character. Dawn Granger had this ability where she could turn into Dove if she was in the presence of danger, right? But if there was no actual danger there, then she wouldn't transform. The reason why this matters is because in the events of the original Blackest Night, that was kind of the big prophecy, right? The prophecy of Blackest Night that essentially like the Black Lantern, the Black Lantern entity Nekron would return, and he would basically start resurrecting all these dead superheroes. Now, the reality of Blackest Night in DC Comics is it was designed to basically be like a soft reboot of sorts, right? Blackest Night and Brightest Day play the scenario whereby Blackest Night would resurrect every single dead superhero. Brightest Day would only keep the ones DC wanted, right? Like White Lanterns could basically return them back to normal. And so the issue with that is, or not really the issue, but the idea that came out of that is a lot of superheroes returned, but then a lot of other superheroes died. And it was basically, it kind of sucked for some fans because it was basically DC saying like, your favorite superhero is not popular enough to keep alive, which kind of stings, to be honest. It stings a little bit, but that was the overall gist of it. The kicker about this is that partway through the story, Dove had basically kind of emitted this white light that basically shut down Black Lantern, right? Essentially just defeated them and destroyed them. And initially it wasn't really explained as to how it was that she was able to do that, at least not until we got to Blackest Night number 3. And then with Barry Allen witnessing the whole thing go down, he came to the realization that Dove was channeling the white light of creation, which is the way in which you defeat Black Lanterns. And so that's why this matters, is because during that scenario, once you got into Blackest Night, the only way to win was to create White Lanterns. And because Sinestro became the first one, in the original story, Sinestro shared his White Lantern abilities, and ultimately the Black Lanterns were essentially destroyed. And this one, the way this played out is that ultimately he didn't do that. Instead of sharing his power, his White Lanterns with the other superheroes of Earth, instead he kept it for himself. And the result was that ultimately he wasn't powerful enough to defeat Nekron on his own, and ultimately Nekron ended up winning out. The Black Lanterns basically killed pretty much all the other superheroes on Earth. And even Sinestro kind of turned the ring on himself and tried to take himself out. And this is where the story basically picks up, because what it does is it ends up showing up with Lobo in San Francisco. Now, I'll be honest with you guys, what a great way to start a story. I love Lobo. I love Lobo because he's just basically DC's character who just doesn't care, which is kind of cool. But at the end of the day, Lobo is a bounty hunter, and ultimately he was sent here for the character of Dove. And the reason why Dove has been able to survive for so long is, again, because of this white light of creation that she channels. Ultimately, she's been able to keep the Black Lanterns at bay. And so as a result of this, Lobo shows up and basically starts taking out these various Black Lanterns, and then ultimately ends up coming across Sinestro, like, or at least Thal Sinestro shows up. Now, this is where things get kind of finicky, because Thal Sinestro is one half Black Lantern and one half White Lantern. Basically, the White Lantern kind of keeps him alive, but the Black Lantern ring is, or at least the death aspect, is always trying to take him out. So he's kind of stuck between life and death. But what you end up doing is basically picking up with him using the White Lantern ring to try to not necessarily resurrect heroes or to fix heroes, but ultimately to kind of buy them some time. And the reason why is because at this point, the way it's indicated here is we can go one of two ways. Either we can say the White Lantern ring, or at least the Black Lanterns, are too far along to be saved permanently, meaning they can't basically be cured of the Black Lantern, or at least the Black Lantern ring infection, or the power that Sinestro has with regards to wielding the white light of creation isn't strong enough. And we could probably go with the second one, that he's simply just not strong enough as a White Lantern to basically fix Black Lanterns to cure them, which sort of makes sense given everything that's gone on here. But when the question is asked why it is that Lobo's here, Lobo basically says, I was tasked with like hiring this chick and bringing her and then taking her to another location. Now, this is where things get kind of interesting, right? Because remember, when it came to the events of Blackest Night, that yes, Ground Zero was in effect Earth, but it spread throughout the universe, like at a rapid pace, right? Like it was moving at a very, very fast clip. That was the idea of Blackest Night, that like the entire universe would be engulfed in darkness. So like everything would basically fall. And so everyone everywhere who's died has been resurrected by a Black Lantern ring. So you're talking about the dead rising astronomically. The difference here is that we are talking about 19 days. We're also talking about the time it takes for rings to get out there, for rings to land and to bond on people, to resurrect them, and so on and so forth. So it's still a process that's kind of ongoing. And that's one of the cool things about this is, yes, we're 19 days into the events of Blackest Night, and people are still being resurrected by Black Lantern rings because so many people have died. As a result of this, Sinestro doesn't really consider Earth to be a lost cause so much as the answers he's seeking on how to eliminate the Black Lantern ring infection don't really reside here. The only thing that really seems to have an answer is Dove, but even Thal Sinestro doesn't know exactly what's going on with her. He knows it's the white light of creation, but aside from that, he doesn't really know how it all works. And so getting together with Lobo and then grabbing Dove and leaving Earth and heading out to their location really is done by Sinestro because in his mind, at least he can get an answer out of it all. Here's one of the funny things that goes on with this is Thal Sinestro really starts to talk about the Black Lanterns. And the idea is that in the mind of Thal Sinestro, while the Black Lanterns represent death, which is technically not part of the emotional spectrum, that its wielders are using the emotional spectrum, that these threads, these tethers that really kind of reached out and pulled them from death and back into life were predicated on emotions that they felt when they did die, right? So like hatred for an enemy or love for an ally or for a family member or something like that. That's what anchors them. That's what keeps them there. So they're still part and parcel to the emotional spectrum, but technically the Black Lanterns are not really an emotional spectrum at all. But once the group arrives at Takron-Galtos, things kind of go awry. Now, here's the important thing to understand here. Takron-Galtos has a history in DC Comics, right? It originally appeared in Adventure Comics number 359. This is basically a prison planet is essentially what this is, right? It's a prison planet that's been used by the Guardians of the Universe. It's a prison planet that's been used by Lobo to basically drop people off. It's designed for high security prisoners. The reason why I mention this and the reason why this is important is because when Sinestro and Dove and Lobo basically start scanning this planet for signs of life or what have you, they basically see a whole bunch of energy signatures, but the temperatures are low, which indicate Black Lanterns. This is important because what it means is this prison planet, home to some of the most dangerous criminals throughout the entirety of the known galaxy and even the universe, have all been turned into Black Lanterns. These include characters like Granny Goodness. These include characters like Big Barda. Like these are basically individuals who work for Darkside, right? Like Big Barda was one of the Furies, one of the female personal henchmen of Darkside himself, as well as Granny Goodness who trained them. So these are not weak people. The problem is that when they get here, there's just so many of them. And so literally like once they get in, you have scot-free Mr. Miracle who's just like fleeing for his life. And he's just like, run that way, just run and keep going. And this is important because one of the things that Scott Free talks about is how he had basically been going from like cell to cell, right? Basically trying to hide out and escape from the various members of the Black Lantern rings. But the idea here is that ultimately he reached out to Dove because of the fact that what he witnessed in terms of Dove using the white light of creation and so on and so forth, she's the way in which this can be defeated. Now again, while Scott Free is probably the greatest escape artist in the entirety of the universe, one of the other things about him is that he's also exceedingly intelligent and exceedingly cunning. And so with him working alongside them, Sinestro does not dismiss him. But ultimately what you end up getting here is basically Scott Free saying that because Dove channels the white light of creation, and because the white light of creation is capable of curing the Black Lanterns and basically removing the Black Lantern infection, that essentially Scott Free has come up with this idea. And what he does is he basically tells them about the source wall, right? That like there's this barrier around the universe with regards to keeping it away from each universe having its own, and then around the entirety of the multiverse as a whole. But the idea was to basically break through the source wall and then essentially find the white light of creation, right? The source of all creation, and then use that source light to basically eradicate everything in the universe, or not really eradicate everything, but to eliminate the Black Lantern infection. Now it's kind of a cool thing because with Dove, really channeling the white light of creation, what it basically says is that where most individuals would see the source, if they even managed to get past the source wall in the first place, which almost nobody ever does, but if they were able to get past the source wall and see the source, most individuals would be driven insane, right? Like just by the power of creation. The difference here is that where most people would be consumed and destroyed by that power, Dove is a living conduit for that power, right? She's like water and electricity. It just flows right through her. And so because of that, she can basically channel the source energies of all creation and then wipe out all the Black Lanterns across the universe. It's an amazing idea. And for people who are fans of Dove, it's kind of their chance to like stand up and to be seen, right? Because like she's a character that I wouldn't say doesn't really get a whole lot of love in DC, but she's certainly a character that, depending on who you're talking to, certainly flies under a lot of people's different radars. And so it's a great moment for a character because ultimately it's agreed upon, yes, this is probably the best idea that we have because you're talking about channeling the light of creation itself. The problem is that when they get there, what's essentially gone on here is that Big Barda alongside like the other lanterns on Earth have all basically tracked them to their location. And so literally using boom tubes, they all just come cruising in, right? Like they all just come flying in. And that's when things really begin to pop off because all these various forces here are all being led by the avatar of Nekron, which is Darkside. What you have here is a Black Lantern Darkside. And can we just say for a minute that a Black Lantern Darkside is amazing? Dude, it looks so cool. It It is amazing. Like, dude, I love the way he looks. It's amazing because the first thing he does here is like he shows up and he literally uses his Omega beams and like seems to destroy Lobo. Now, here's a funny thing, is so long as a single cell of Lobo exists, he can duplicate himself. And so if that's the case, like literally Lobo just comes back, right? He just brings himself right back, and it just keeps happening that way, right? Like Lobo just duplicates himself over and over again. So you've got an army of Lobos against all the Black Lanterns, along with Thal Sinestro doing the best he can. Now, this is when you get this amazing Thal Sinestro moment. Up until this point, one of the big things that Thal Sinestro's kind of been doing is he's kind of been like, okay, let's focus on the mission. But you haven't really seen not really the softer side, but the more, I guess, human, for lack of a better word, side of Thal Sinestro. He's not really human, but like the compassionate side of his character. And when he's confronted by Saranac Natu, who's his biological daughter, as well as Hal Jordan, ultimately he uses his White Lantern power for a second, yanks them back to their normal selves, and then just apologizes and spills the beans and says, I'm sorry. Like, I did what I did and I failed. And I doomed our universe to the Black Lanterns conquering everything. If I had done what I was supposed to, and if I had not let my pride get the better of me, then you guys would have been White Lanterns and we would have saved all of creation. But I was a fool and I destroyed everything that matters. Like this kind of outpouring of Sinestro is something that you don't really see that often in DC Comics. And it's a good thing that you don't, because if you did, then it would take away from the impact. So the fact that you see it, this little moment here, the fact that you see this is amazing because it shows that Thal Sinestro is still a very complex being. And it's one of the coolest things about his character. It's one of the best things about his character. He's not some two-dimensional villain of the week. You see complexity, and that's what really drives. And that's one of the reasons why I say oftentimes the villains are more interesting than the heroes. Because if I sat Hal Jordan next to Thal Sinestro and I said, I had to compare which one do I like the most, Thal Sinestro, every single time. He's more interesting, he's more complex, he's a great character. He's one of the best characters in all of DC. And so with that being the case, what's essentially happened here is a kind of harness has been constructed for Dove in order for her to basically harness the white light of creation. The funny thing about this is that Scott Free was never actually told what would happen. All he was told is that the source would be harnessed by Dove, and then in turn she would quote unquote fix everything. What ends up happening here is Darkside chimes in with the truth of the situation, which is confirmed by Thal Sinestro, that what's going to happen here is that in this scenario, the source is going to wipe everything out. It's going to wipe the entire universe out and essentially reboot it, right? That's what it's going to do. And ultimately what that would mean is that all the characters as they seem to exist here now would simply cease to exist, and the universe would be started over again. It'd be a clean slate is what they refer to it as. And it's interesting because in that moment, what you end up having is Scott Free, who says no. Like initially he shuts it down because he's like, I don't want to do anything without Big Barda. Now, initially it's really easy to dismiss this and it's kind of be like, okay, so this is stupid, but it actually works because for people who have been reading Scott Free for a long time, who have been reading stories of Mr. Miracle, him and Big Barda are two peas in a pod, right? Like they're one of the coolest couples in all of DC Comics and really in comic books, depending on who's writing the story. And so with Scott Free, one, having to leave Big Barda behind because of the fact that she's a Black Lantern, and then two, having to abandon any possibility of saving her is more than he can handle. And so whether by love or foolishness, he ends up killing Dove. He ends up snapping her neck, and he won't let her basically wipe out everything else across the universe and kind of restart it all. And what this does is it almost seems to put into this perspective the fact that like the Black Lanterns have won. And this is when Thal Sinestro gets his moment. And this is why I love it. See, this is why I love Sinestro. He says, yes, I was arrogant and I was foolish and I doomed the universe to this mistake, but I will not make the same mistake twice. I will not screw up twice. And he says, and the reason why is because Hal Jordan was right. I am the greatest lantern that there ever was. I am the absolute best. I will reincarnate everyone, and I'm the living avatar of life. I will not fail. And so where he's unable to save Dove, what he says is that because Lobo is able to basically duplicate himself in such a way that Lobo is essentially a being that's life incarnate. And so using Lobo, he basically channels the power of the source through Lobo, and in turn that goes through and wipes out all the Black Lanterns, and then also wipes out everything else, really kind of clean slates the entirety of the universe. And so following that, what this does is it sort of goes forward in this way where society begins to sort of rebuild. There's this kind of religion, this kind of societal perspective that like Lobo is kind of their god, is really sort of how they view them. It's cool the way this goes down. The problem with this is that unlike all these other individuals out there who basically were clean slated, restarted more or less, Thal Sinestro didn't experience any of that. He's watching all of this unfold. He's watching all of this go down, this universe come into existence, and where he's trying to essentially escape in what's now called the Limbo Lantern. Basically, that's what he is now. Like this lantern is kind of stuck in limbo between life and death, where they call him the Limbo Lantern, and he's trying to escape because the entire role of Tempest Fudgenaut is to cordon off these universes and make sure nothing gets in and nothing gets out. Ultimately, Thal Sinestro struggles against resistance and can never leave his universe. But basically what you're talking about here in Tales of the Dark Multiverse is an entire universe that was successfully conquered by the Black Lanterns, and then it came down to maybe a couple people who were able to basically fix everything. It's a cool story. Unlike the other ones, it doesn't end on a dark note. It doesn't end on the note of like, this is a universe where the Black Lanterns won and everybody ended up becoming a Black Lantern in the end, and now we're waiting for this big crisis to happen in 2020 in DC when like this entire universe of Black Lanterns is going to show up. But what you are going to get is Limbo Lantern Sinestro, which is an amazing concept. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoy this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.